A Chinese car company just built a battery that charges in 4 minutes and can drive for 1 million kilometers before it dies. For 30 years, every battery engineer on Earth believed this was impossible. You could have a fast battery, or a long-lasting battery, or a safe battery. Never all three. That rule just broke, and the company that broke it is Geely. The battery is called the Golden Brick. It uses a chemistry called LFP, which stands for lithium iron phosphate. This is not some rare or expensive material. LFP has been used in electric cars for years because it is cheap and safe. What it was never known for was speed. That changed when Geely tested this battery at 1,093 kilowatts of charging power. To put that number in words that matter, this battery can go from 10% to 70% charge in 4 minutes and 22 seconds. Push it further to 97% and it only takes 8 minutes and 42 seconds. That is faster than most people spend waiting in line for coffee. Here is the part that should worry every other car company on the planet. Fast charging usually destroys batteries. When you push electricity into a battery quickly, it creates heat, and heat breaks down the chemicals inside. This is why phone batteries get weaker after a year or two of fast charging. Geely's engineers had to solve this heat problem, or the battery would die fast even if it charged fast. Their answer was cooling from both sides of the battery cell at once, instead of just one side like almost every other car on the road today. They also built the car with a 900-volt electrical system instead of the usual 400 volts. Higher voltage means less current has to flow through the wires, and less current means less heat. During the full power test, the battery reached a peak temperature of 64 degrees Celsius. China's new safety law says an LFP battery cannot legally go above 65 degrees. Geely hit the ceiling with only 1 degree to spare, while charging faster than any production LFP battery in history. Now here is where the story gets bigger. Speed alone does not matter if the battery dies after 2 years. Geely claims their battery can survive 4,500 full charge cycles before it drops below usable capacity. A full cycle means charging from empty to full one time. If the average driver gets around 220 kilometers of range per full charge, then 4,500 cycles out to roughly 990,000 kilometers. Geely rounds that up and calls it 1 million kilometers. Most people never even keep a car past 200,000 kilometers. This means the car itself would likely fall apart from age before the battery ever needed replacing. And a special flexible binder that holds everything together even as it stretches and shrinks over and over. On top of that, they coated the electrodes with a protective layer, almost like sunscreen, to stop the electricity from wearing down the material every time it charges. So the battery charges fast and it lasts a long time. But does it explode in a crash? This is where Geely went further than anyone expected. Since 2024, they have run 48 separate destructive test programs, using more than 48,000 hours of testing, and destroying nearly 7,000 battery samples on purpose. Some of these tests sound almost impossible to survive. They drove a 36-ton tank directly over a fully built battery pack, using 1.8 times more weight than the legal requirement, and the battery held together with no damage. They fired a 5.56mm bullet, the same round used in military rifles, straight through a fully charged cell at over 920 meters per second. The bullet passed clean through, and the battery kept working with no fire. Then came the needle test, where steel needles were pushed into a charged cell from multiple directions at once to simulate the worst possible short circuit. Engineers watched the cell for a full hour afterward. No smoke, no fire, no explosion. It just sat there like nothing happened. This obsession with testing comes from a new Chinese law called GB 38031/2025, which takes effect on July 1, 2026. The old rule only required a battery to warn the driver 5 minutes before catching fire, giving them time to get out while the car burned. The new rule is far stricter. A battery must produce 0 flames and 0 explosions for a full 2 hours after a failure begins. Geely did not wait for the deadline. They certified their entire battery lineup by May 2025, more than a year early. So does this mean Geely has beaten its biggest rival, BYD? Not exactly. BYD's own charging system can technically hit a higher peak of 1,500 kilowatts on paper. But in real-world driving, Geely's battery actually charges from low to useful range faster than BYD's. The real gap is not the battery itself, it is the charging network. Bide built its own charging stations from the ground up, so drivers know a station will work every time they pull up. Geely currently depends on a partner network that only covers a handful of cities, backed up by a deal with NIO to use their stations elsewhere. A brilliant battery is still limited by how many places can actually deliver that kind of power. On Monday, July 27, 2026, a chipmaker almost nobody outside China had heard of walked onto the Shanghai Stock Exchange and did something no one saw coming. Its stock opened, and within hours, exchange officials had to freeze trading multiple times just to slow it down. By the closing bell, shares were up 466% in a single day. Not over a year, not over a month, one day. The company is called CXMT, short for Changxin Memory Technologies, and it just became the single most valuable publicly listed company in mainland China, bigger than the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, which had held that spot for years. If you'd bought in at the IPO price of 8.66 yuan, by the end of the day your shares were worth 49 yuan. That's not a typo. Here's what makes this stranger than your average hype stock. CXMT doesn't make apps. It doesn't make electric cars. It makes DRAM, the boring, unglamorous memory chips that sit inside your phone, your laptop, and every single server rack powering the current AI boom. And for over 2 decades, that entire global market has been carved up by just 3 companies, Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron, who together control roughly 90% of the world's DRAM supply. Nobody was supposed to be able to break into that club. Companies tried and died trying. Japan's Elpida went bankrupt. Germany's Chimanda collapsed. The barrier to entry was billions of dollars and decades of engineering knowledge that only 3 companies on Earth actually had. And then CXMT, founded in 2016, barely 10 years old, walked in and blew the doors off. Let's talk real numbers, because this is where it gets serious. CXMT raised 57.92 billion yuan in its IPO, that's about $8. 6 billion, making it the largest semiconductor listing in mainland Chinese history. By the end of its first trading day, its market cap hit 3.3 trillion yuan, which works out to roughly $488 billion. And it didn't stop there. By the end of that first week, shares had kept climbing, pushing the company's valuation up to 3.54 trillion yuan, or about $523 billion. And the reaction from the rest of the world's chip industry was immediate and brutal. On the same day CXMT surged, Micron Technology stock fell 5%. SanDisk dropped more than 12%. American-listed shares tied to SK Hynix fell 8.5%. Even ASML, the Dutch company that makes the extreme ultraviolet lithography machines that the entire chip industry depends on, lost more than 7% of its value in a single session. Think about that. A memory chip maker in Hefei, a city most Americans couldn't find on a map, triggered a sell-off that reached South Korea, the US, and the Netherlands, all in the same 24 hours. So why did the market panic like this? Because CXMT isn't some random speculative bet. It's the 4th largest DRAM producer on the planet, already holding about 7.67% of the global DRAM market as of 2025, according to its own IPO filing. That's real revenue, real production, real customers, not a story about future potential. And here's the number that should actually worry the incumbents. CXMT's guidance for the first half of 2026 puts revenue somewhere between 110 billion and 120 billion yuan, more than 7 times what it made the year before, with projected net profit between 66 billion and 75 billion yuan, a complete flip from an operating loss just 12 months earlier. In the first quarter alone, the company posted an operating profit of 35.43 billion yuan, compared to a 2.83 billion yuan operating loss in the same quarter a year prior. CXMT is still years behind Samsung and SK Hynix on the most advanced memory technology, particularly high bandwidth memory, or HBM, the specialized chips that power AI accelerators from companies like NVIDIA. This IPO didn't happen in a vacuum. It landed at the exact moment the global AI industry is starving for memory. Every new AI model, every new data center, every new generation of GPUs needs more DRAM than the last. And demand has been outpacing supply for the better part of 2 years. CXMT walked into that shortage with $8.6 billion in fresh capital, a filing that shows it's already profitable at scale. Watch what CXMT does with that $8.6 billion, and watch how fast Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron respond. That's where this story actually gets decided, not on IPO day, but in what happens next. For over 100 years, copper has run the wires in your walls, the cables under your streets, and the grid that powers your whole city. Now a lab in China has built a carbon fiber that beats copper on the one number that actually matters for weight and strength. But before you believe copper is finished, you need to hear what this fiber still cannot do, because that gap is bigger than most headlines admit. Copper became the king of electricity for a simple reason. It was never the best conductor on Earth. Silver actually beats it. But silver costs far too much to string across a whole country. Copper struck the right balance of good conductivity, low cost, and the ability to bend without breaking. That balance kept it in charge for over a century, and nobody had a real reason to replace it. That is starting to change because copper is running short. A study by S&P Global, published in January 2026, found that global copper demand is on track to hit 42 million metric tons by 2040. That is a 50% jump from where things stand today. The same study said the shortfall between how much copper the world needs and how much can be mined could reach 10 million metric tons by 2040. Copper prices already jumped 41% in 2025, the biggest single-year rise in more than 10 years. The reason is simple. Electric cars use about 3 times more copper than gas cars. Offshore wind turbines each need several tons of it. Data centers built for artificial intelligence need copper in every cable and every cooling system. And new mines take 10 to 15 years to go from discovery to production, so there is no fast fix. This is the moment a Chinese science team stepped in with something that sounds impossible. At the Shenyang National Laboratory for Material Science, part of the Institute of Metal Research under the Chinese Academy of Sciences in Liaoning Province, researchers spent years trying to solve a problem that had stumped scientists everywhere since 1991. That year, scientists discovered the carbon nanotube, a tube of carbon atoms rolled into a cylinder about 1 nanometer wide. For comparison, a human hair is about 100,000 nanometers thick. A single nanotube is about 100 times stronger than steel of the same size, and it can carry electricity better than almost anything humans have built. Here is the part that kept this material stuck in labs for over 20 years. 1 nanotube is amazing on its own. But when scientists tried to bundle thousands of them into a real fiber you could actually use, the tubes clumped and lost contact with each other. Together, they fall apart. The team at Shenyang finally cracked that problem. They took an existing method called dry jet wet spinning, where nanotube material gets pulled through a small air gap and then dropped into a bath that hardens it into a fiber. That single fix is what changed everything. In 2023, the team published a paper in the journal Ax Nano showing a fiber made of nanotubes coated in a thin layer of copper. That fiber hit a specific conductivity 56% higher than pure copper wire. In 2024, the same lab produced a pure double-walled carbon nanotube fiber with a conductivity of 1.1 times 10 to the 7th